Okay, so, um, so in Deltarune, there is a lot of confusion right now about who the Roaring Knight is. And based on a lot of identifying features, the most common conclusion is that December Holiday, or alternatively Carol and maybe Rudy, um, is the Roaring Knight. Um, and while I think that conclusion is the most logical and obvious, and most definitely the most likely, I think there is still a lot of interesting debate to be held around other knight candidates, whether they are presented in a genuine sense or more of a, interesting concept sense, like the Santa's Nest theory. In a sense, you could call me a modern Matt Pat. Way I'm Santing my nest. Um, but to put it simply, I believe that there is a lot of interesting evidence to bring one to the conclusion that CHARA, from Undertale, of course, is the Roaring Knight. Now, that's a little insane, but I think there is a lot of signs that point to it. Now, the first thing to get out of the way with this idea, this theory, is CHARA's relevance to Deltarune rather than Undertale. Now, of course, they're relevant to Undertale, obviously, but there is some implied relevance to CHARA in Deltarune. The only thing we've seen so far, directly at least, that would be seen as possibly CHARA, and is one of the only popular things that has been concluded to be maybe, possibly, likely CHARA, is in the opening sequence, the Goner Maker. Of course, Gaster is talking to you about throughout the entire sequence, but at the end, after you finished creating the vessel, Gaster goes to say, "Your wonderful, wonderful creation," and then is cut off, and a new voice says, "Will now be discarded. No one can choose who they are in this world. Your name is Chris, of course." Um, Now, this voice, firstly, is not Gaster, which, obviously the first voice is Gaster. I don't think anyone's denying that at this point. But the second voice, I do not believe is Gaster. I believe it is CHARA. The speech patterns are similar, and they refer to the world of Deltarune as this world, which is the same way that they refer to Undertale's world. Hold on. Yes. In the ending dialogue of Undertale, Genocide Route in particular, they say, "Let us erase this pointless world. This world." They don't refer to it as the world. They don't refer to Deltarune's world as the world. And after they say, "Let's erase this pointless world," they say, "Move on to the next." Now, in real-world release order, Deltarune is the world after Undertale. Deltarune is intended for people who have completed a full run of Undertale. The next world for the players would be Deltarune. So, logically, it would seem that Deltarune would be the world that CHARA had moved on to. And in the Genocide Route of Undertale, CHARA's goal by the end is to, as they said, erase this pointless world. And what is the Knight doing in Deltarune? They are attempting to cause the Roaring, erasing this world. Now, furthermore, after saying their signature dialogue at this point, "Let's erase this world and move on to the next," they, at some point in this dialogue, they mention that it doesn't matter when, it doesn't matter where, time after time I will appear, and with your help, we will eradicate the enemy and become strong. I believe. Or am I getting lied to? No. Moving on. The soul in Undertale is heavily implied, to be the same soul that is in Deltarune. This is mainly found from Chapter 1's dialogue with Sans, and maybe a few other characters I don't entirely remember. I haven't played Chapter 1 in a long time. In dialogue with Sans, the player is given the option to say, "It is nice to meet you again," something like that, you know. And that is, of course, implying that we've met Sans before. And we, the player, have, if we've played Undertale. And we're now in the next world, you know? But Sans then goes on to say, it's a weird thing to say considering I've never met you before, something like that. Now, you are at many points in Undertale implied to be, well, not many points, but at points during their final dialogue, and directly stated in the end, that you are under their control. And in Deltarune, Chris is at many points implied to be under the Knight's control. They are the Knight's what would be the word? Howling squire, if you would. And of course, this would go on to create a connection between these two relationships. The relationship between the soul and CHARA in Undertale, and the soul, or rather Chris, and the Knight in Deltarune. Now, we know that whoever the Knight is, whether it's Carol or Des, and, you know, if it's Carol, this is more direct, is aware of the soul's existence, and is aware that the soul and Chris, you know, aren't, you know, the same. And let's just imply, based on the dialogue from the phone, about Chris and the soul, or Chris not being able to go without their soul, or they cannot enter the Dark Worlds. This is during one of the scenes in Chapter 4's Light World section, where you are disconnected from Chris temporarily. Now, this all comes together to imply a large amount of connection between CHARA and the Knight. Now, some more interesting parallels are how the Knight's main attacks, slashes of course, are red, which is something we have not really seen much in Undertale or Deltarune. That I can remember, it is only seen from Frisk and Chara's slashes in Undertale. Slashes made with the Black Shard, a piece of the Knight's knife, and, well, the Knight's attacks. Particularly the attack on Tenna has very similar shape, and not really similar color, but still, you know, the same. It's still red. Like similar shape to that original slash from Undertale. This all, to me, points to the conclusion that CHARA is the Roaring Knight. However, there is a lot of counter evidence. Predominantly, why does the Knight have antlers? And my thought for this has always just been, that's a helmet. The antlers are vanity. And in a lot of people's interpretations, CHARA is a part of the Holiday family, which is a really interesting parallel, because in Undertale, of course, they're part of the Dreamer family, and those two families are kind of parallels to each other in many ways. So, it's possible that CHARA put these antlers on their helmet as homage to their whole family or whatever, even though under a lot of this, they probably wouldn't care about their family, but yeah, whatever. We'll scrub that away. The Lost Girl motif is, again, if CHARA is part of the holidays, you know, that is a connection, but still, I think that is obviously a motif more tied to Death, and therefore I think that's stronger evidence for Death Knight than for CHARA Holiday Knight, but it's worth noting. And As for why Kara would really be here, well, Chris is very close to being an anagram for Frisk, of course. So, it's possible that the Dreamers adopted a human child who is the parallel to Frisk. You know, there's Sans from Undertale and Sans from Deltarune, probably the same character. But there's Toriel from Undertale and Toriel from Deltarune, probably not the same character. Or same thing for Asgore. And there could be Chris and Frisk, and possibly Kara and, well, Kara. Which, maybe Kara in this world is named Death. Maybe Death is Kara. Who knows? Probably not, mind you, but it's possible, you know. Maybe. That's about everything. Didn't write a script for this, so it's all just rambling. I'm going deranged about this again. Woo! Woo! Woohoo! Yeah! Alright, that's about it.